My name is Adam Ernest Scheihagen. The date is August 23rd, 1985. I was born on a ranch in Swisher County, Texas on March 6, 1920. I mention this date of my birth mainly because of the impact it had on my career as a pilot. I first wanted to fly, well, I'm not real sure when I first wanted to fly, but I made my first attempt to fly when I was 4 years old. I got some cardboard and some grocery twine and tied the cardboard to my arms, and, well, fortunately it was a low barn and I wasn't hurt. But needless to say, I didn't succeed in flying. However, the desire to fly grew and kept on growing in me, and by the time I was 10 or 12 years old, I wanted to be an airline pilot. When I got out of high school, I had about given up the hope of ever learning to fly because of the cost. So I went off to college at West Texas State Teachers College, it was then, now West Texas State University, and decided to major in music and expected to become a music teacher and probably a band director. On May the 29th, 1940, at the end of my junior year, I married Ethel Fleetwood Vinson, and we came to Huntsville for the summer, Huntsville being her home. And when I returned when we returned to West Texas State that fall, I found that the government had started a program called the Civilian Pilot Training Program, and it was being offered at West Texas State, and so I had a chance to learn to fly at no cost. I had just about completed the primary program, which ran for nearly a semester, just about ready to take my private license check ride when the CAA, it was called in, the Civil Aviation Authority, sent them a letter and told them to discontinue me because I was too light for my height and my weight was too low. So they discontinued me, and when the program started again the next semester, I signed back up for it, and this time I had my weight up and went through and got my private, and then in the summer I graduated that spring from West Texas State with my music degree and also a degree in education. However, flying was in my blood, and that was what I really wanted to do, so that summer I took the CPT secondary program at Amarillo, Texas, and then I had to wait a few months before I could get into the final phase of the program, which was called a cross-country program. In that program, I got training in cross-country flying, navigation, and so forth, sort of really the basics of instrument flying, but no actual instrument flying, mostly the radio work and that sort of thing. And also, you got a commercial license instructor's rating when you completed it. I was called by CA in Fort Worth and asked if I was in Amarillo at the time playing in a dance band, making a good living. For those days, I made $5 a night, 6 nights a week, and we had a very nice apartment a couple of blocks from where I worked, and lived very well, and it only took about half of what I earned for us to live. Of course, I had no car, no kids, and it was not too, well, it was very cheap to live in those days compared to the prices today. Anyway, the CAA called me from Fort Worth and asked me if I wanted to continue the training, and I said yes, so they said be in Albuquerque, New Mexico on January the 1st, 1941. So I went to Albuquerque and got my commercial license and the instructor rating there, finished that up on March the 22nd, 1942. Correction, that date was January 1st, 1942. pilots of all kinds and instructors were highly in demand, and so on April the 1st, I had a job at Kilgore Flying Service in Kilgore, Texas, as an instructor. And my first program was CPT primary. I had 10 CPT students and all the outside students I could handle because we worked from daylight till dark, 7 days a week. And so I got in quite a bit of flying. And then after I finished that first program of students, I started instructing CPT secondary, which is primarily acrobatics or aerobatics. And while I was instructing that, a fellow by the name of Tex Butler came to Kilgore. That was his home, and he was working for Transcontinental and Western Air, it was called then. Now it's called Trans World Airlines. And they were needing pilots very bad. As a matter of fact, I found all the airlines were wanting pilots. So I went to Fort Worth to get a release from my training job, and they said they'd give me a release, but they wanted me to finish the program I was in, which I said I would do. And while I was there, American Airlines tried to get me to go to work for them, and on the hindsight, I guess I should have, but I wanted to go to work for TWA because I could make more money. I could get a job on the Intercontinental Division, which was a contract operation to the U.S. Army, and was flying overseas out of Washington, D.C. to the British Isles and down to Africa and South America. And this appealed to me. So I went to work for TWA instead of American. Actually, I guess I could have gone to work for any airline in the country at that time because pilots were so in demand. But I went to work for TWA on September the 15th, 1942, and then along about the 1st of 1944, the Army started building its own transport system called the Air Transport Command at that time, and they began taking airplanes back for their own operation. We were flying on TWA the Boeing Stratoliner, which is the first pressurized transport, and was really a derivative of the B-17, a very unstable airplane and not a very good airplane really. And we were also flying C-54s or DC-4s, and that was a good airplane. I enjoyed flying it very much. But anyway, the Army started taking the C-54s back to build an Air Transport Command, and TWA started furloughing pilots. And I was afraid I was going to get furloughed and left to the draft to go in the walk-in Army, so I found the Navy was building their Naval Air Transport System and were wanting airline pilots. So I went down to the Navy Department in Washington and applied for a commission, and they were very encouraging. In fact, they greeted me with open arms and told me if I had any problems with the physical to let them know, and they'd see if they couldn't get me by. But I didn't have any problems with that, and I got my commission on June the 15th. I had left TWA on March the 15th and went back to Hereford, and by this time we had one child, our first, Ernest Vincent Scheihagen, and of course I had to report to my draft board and let them know that I was no longer eligible for deferment because of my work. And pretty soon they were ready to draft me with no consideration for the fact that I was waiting on a commission in the Navy where I could utilize my training to a better advantage than just being an infantryman or something of that sort in the Army. So before they drafted me, I went to Huntsville, and that postponed my draft time a month while they transferred the papers. And then the day I was supposed to report for the draft, I reported to Dallas and was sworn in the Navy. So I had just barely missed being drafted, and got my commission as an ensign in the Navy, and my orders were to go to Corpus Christi for a flight refresher and training in naval regulations and procedures and so forth. And after I reported there, very shortly after I was sworn in, I've forgotten the exact date, but sometime in June of 1944, and then at the end of September, I got my wings, Navy wings that is, and since my orders to active duty said that I would be sent to a Naval Air Transport Squadron on completion of my training, I was sent to Naval Air Transport Squadron VR-3 in Olathe, Kansas. And there we had R-4Ds, or better known as the DC-3, and they wanted to check me out as a plane commander immediately, but I requested to have a few co-pilot trips to get familiar with their operation and the airplane, because I had never flown that airplane before. And so they said, okay, they'd recommend me for 3 co-pilot trips. Well, I got in 5 co-pilot trips before the next plane commander's class started, and checked out as plane commander and was flying while the squadron flew from out of Olathe to New York in the east and to Oakland, California in the west. We had it broken into 3 segments just as I finished training, and there was a segment from Oakland to either Phoenix or Winslow, Arizona, that was flown by a detachment based in Oakland, and there was a segment flown from Olathe to Phoenix or Winslow, which we call the Central Sector, and the other sector was from Olathe to New York. And I was assigned to the Central Sector, so I was flying from Olathe to either Winslow or Phoenix, depending on the particular flight, because this was operated like an airline. We had a regular stop in Amarillo, both directions, and occasionally we might have to stop in Albuquerque or Wichita, Kansas for fuel or on account of weather. And we had some trips that went to Olathe to Fort Worth to Phoenix and on out. And so I'd fly that some too. Then at the end of, about the end of June of 1945, I was transferred to DR-11 Squadron based in Honolulu. And I first went to Crow's Landing, California, which is close to Stockton, California, in the San Joaquin Valley, and was checked out in the R-5D or DC-4 at that place, having only flown as co-pilot on the DC-4 or C-54, the Army called it. On TWA, I was not qualified to fly it as a plane commander, so I went through plane commander school on that airplane in Crow's Landing in July of 1945. It seemed like I had a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time of the year. I was in Olathe, Kansas through the winter of 44-45 when it was cold and icy, and then I went through plane commander school in Crow's Landing, California in July, where it was the hottest place I've ever been for any length of time. But anyway, upon completion of my checkout there, I went to Honolulu and flew out of Honolulu to as far west as the Philippines and as far east as Oakland. And then in November of 1945, the war was over and they were releasing men from the service, and I managed to get out and was sent to a place between, I've forgotten the name of it now, it was between Houston and Galveston for release from the Navy and discharge, and I had some terminal leave coming, so I officially was out of the Navy about the end of December of 1945. Then I went to work for a company in Houston called Texas Airlines. On the first in long about the end of January, or in January of 1946. TWA was willing to give me a job, but they didn't want to give me my seniority. They were having some internal strife about people that had flown on the Intercontinental Division, which I was on, and so they didn't want to give me my seniority, and I said, well, I'd rather not go to the bottom of the list, so I went to work for Texas Airlines in Houston, and was right at the top of the seniority list, and I was flying mostly Houston up to Dallas and Fort Worth. In fact, they sent me to Fort Worth to fly out of there. They just had two pilots up there, me and another fellow, and we flew the Houston or Fort Worth down to Houston and back route. And Texas Airlines flew pretty much all over the state of Texas. It was one of the many post-war airlines that started up, and we were flying Cessna UC-78s, or sometimes called a Bamboo Bomber. And it was a twin-engine airplane, fabric covered, only carried 4 passengers and a pilot. And really the company was trying to get mail routes from the CAB at that time in Texas, and they thought they'd have an advantage if they started up, had an operation going, but CAB decided to award the routes to Trans-Texas Airlines. So Texas Airlines then went out of business in December of 1946, and I went to work for Pioneer Airlines on February the 3rd, 1947. All these things happened at the right time for me because I happened to be born at the right time, and I got a lot of training, got a lot of experience, and I went to work, as I said, for Pioneer on February the 3rd of 1947. Went in to upgrade as captain on the DC-3s in September of 1947, and flew my first captain trip in October. And this was where my timing, which I had no control over really, it was just the way things worked, and the way the Lord had it planned for me, I suppose. I'm sure of it. Fellows that were hired within 3 months after I was on Pioneer flew co-pilot for 10 years. And I was flying captain most of that time. In fact, I was reserve captain from October through 47 through April of 1948, and then in May of 1948 I had a regular bid and flew a regular line of time. Then in 1951 Pioneer got the Martin 202s, and I loved that airplane. It was a real fine performing airplane, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but the CAB, Civil Aeronautics Board that is, saw fit not to support Pioneer in their operation of that airplane, so we had to get rid of them and go back to DC-3s. And then in 1955, Pioneer merged with Continental Airlines on April the 1st, and so I was still flying DC-3s on Continental. However, in 1956, I checked out in the Convair, and we were flying Convair 340s and 440s, and I was flying as a reserve captain and mixing Convair and DC-3 time. And in I believe it was 1957 or 8, Continental got the Vickers Viscount Mark II, which was a British-built airplane, a turboprop airplane, and a real fun airplane to fly. It was quite different, and I checked out on that, and again, still flying it only as a reserve and mixing it with DC-3 time. Finally, in 1962, I decided that if I was ever going to get out of the DC-3 permanently and progress in my career, I was going to have to leave Dallas, which we had moved to in 1950 from Houston on Pioneer. So I bid out of Dallas to El Paso, and the El Paso base on Continental was strictly Viscount operation. In the El Paso base, we flew El Paso up to Denver and back, or El Paso to Houston and back, or El Paso to Los Angeles and back. Of course, these routes had intermediate stops between the El Paso and the Denver, Houston, and Los Angeles. I moved my family from Dallas to El Paso on July the 4th, 1962. And then in March of 1963, the company said they were going to close the El Paso base. It was some time, though, before they closed it. They didn't close it until the end of September 1964. In the meantime, I decided the place for me to go when they closed the base was Los Angeles. I could have gone to Dallas or Denver with the same seniority number. I'd been number 15, I believe it was, in either base as a captain, or I'd have been a co-pilot in Los Angeles. And thinking that the future was really in Los Angeles with the jets, where Continental had gotten Boeing 707s in 1959, I believe it was, and we're flying those out of Los Angeles, and I decided that was the place to be. And so I went to Los Angeles as a co-pilot, thinking I'd be a co-pilot for probably 8 months and then probably make a reserve captain and be there in that position the rest of my career. However, it didn't work out that way. I flew co-pilot for 4 months and made reserve captain. And then 4 months later after that, I had a regular line of time as a bid captain on the jets. Then in 1965, Continental started flying a contract operation to Vietnam with the 707-320s. And this was an operation similar to the one I'd been on in TWA, and contract to the military. The big difference was we flew our own airplanes. And so I went on that operation in May of 1967 and flew on that to Vietnam, with stops in Honolulu or Wake, and sometimes Guam, a regular layover in the Philippines or Okinawa, and occasionally I'd get a trip from the East Coast. I flew 2 or 3 trips from Dover, Delaware to Anchorage, Alaska to Tokyo or to Okinawa. And we'd go from Okinawa or the Philippines to Vietnam and back, or to Vietnam and the other place, Okinawa or the Philippines. We might go Philippines, Vietnam, Okinawa, or Okinawa, Vietnam, Philippines, and occasionally to, quite frequently to Thailand, to Bangkok, and occasionally to Hong Kong or to Tokyo, to Korea. And it was a very interesting operation. I stayed on that 5 years, getting off in May of 1972. In the meantime, Continental had gotten commercial routes from LA to Honolulu and Seattle to Honolulu. So I got off the MAC, as we called it, Military Airlift Command operation to Vietnam in May of 72 and bid the LA, Honolulu, Seattle route. And we had gotten Douglas DC-10s about that time, and I decided not to fly them until we'd had them for a little while. So I flew that Honolulu operation for a few months, and then in October of 72, I went through checkout on the DC-10 and was qualified as captain. However, my bid onto the DC-10 wasn't effective till the 1st of January 1973. I flew the DC-10 then until I retired on officially March 6, 1980. My last trip was on March the 5th, 1980. And I loved the DC-10. It was a real fine airplane, very stable, but quite sophisticated. And the job became pretty much one of twisting knobs and punching buttons and very automated. And I was beginning to get kind of tired of my job. I'm tired of flying after nearly 40 years. And so I was eager for my 60th birthday to come so I could retire. My career had been very prosaic, really. I'd only had one incident in which I was thought, as pilots often call it, that I'd bought the farm, and that was in a thunderstorm between Amarillo and Tucumcari when I was in the Navy flying the R-4Ds. it warped the airplane so badly out of shape that they maybe had to scrap it. But we survived, and my career was very pleasant. I enjoyed it very much, and it was a very satisfying time in my life. And I just praise God that He gave me the opportunity and the ability and all the things needed that I could have such a career. It was really a great career, and I have no regrets of having been an airline pilot for almost 38 years.